Soccer Today is powered by Spin Media. From podcast to video production, visit spinmediadigitalsolutions.com and bring your content to the next level.
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, golazo,
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Wednesday, September 14th, 2022. I'm Kevin Laramie and Duane Rollins will be joining us in just a second as we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube page, subscribe to our podcast feeds, and like and follow us on all the social media platforms as we continue our journey to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube and our continuous journey upwards in the soccer charts and podcast charts across North America. Today on the show, Duane, we'll be talking about Montreal's big win last night in a torrential rained Stade Saputo, where I have to say an hour before kickoff, it looked more like a Lake Saputo than Stade Saputo, but impressed by the drainage of the grass. The game was actually pretty enjoyable. We'll talk about that. We'll break down the scores across Major League Soccer, and we will preview Wednesday night's slate in Major League Soccer. But first, Duane, how are you today?
I'm glad that the drainage is, I'm glad that the drainage is working well at Saputo. I remember going to the friendly there in 2008 where the turf was literally lifting up. The stadium had just opened. That's a long time ago now. It's good to know that. Saputo was a different stadium then too. They added, made it fancier. Yeah, that was when it just had opened.
And you can see pictures online of the field an hour before kickoff. It was very impressive. But Montreal was also very impressive once it started with a big win, 3-2, against a determined Chicago Fire team that would never say die. Let's look at some of the key numbers in that game. First of all, Montreal 3, Chicago 2, at home for Montreal, their 8th win at home this season. Not necessarily the best in the league. They were 13th at home, their regular season record this year before yesterday's game. 11 shots, 5 on target for Montreal, 6 for Chicago, 3 on target. 2 of those were penalties scored by Xherdan Shaqiri. One of them was questionable, one of them was maybe for sure. And altogether, with the decisions or non-decisions across the board, I think it was not necessarily Uncle Ted's greatest evening as a referee, but that's par for the course on a very rainy Stade Saputo. But Kamara scored twice and Zachary Broguillard scored also. Interesting name when it comes to Canada's roster that should be revealed probably tomorrow. Waterman will also be in the conversation. But let's start with Kamara, Duane. He scored 2 goals last night, becoming the heart of this team.
Yeah, as you mentioned yesterday, Montreal's a team that doesn't really have a superstar in the truest sense, but I would say Kamara, in terms of an overall career, would be their biggest presence within MLS, their MLS overall resume, right? But he's a veteran. He's, at the end, clearly a guy that we weren't even sure was going to play up until Montreal put him on, but he certainly came forth and provided, not just veteran leadership, which is important, but also scoring.
Second best scorer, third with Georgi Mihailovic, but he has 8 goals, 7 assists for Kamara this season.
Yeah, and a brace last night. And look, I texted you earlier. I wanted to talk in particular about that first goal that Montreal scored last night. And it's a nice little flick. He deflects it and redirects the ball, and that's purposeful too. That's not an accidental deflection, right? He's directing that ball. And it's smart. Look how he runs. Look how he positions himself. Look how he's aware of the defenders around him to make sure he doesn't go offside, and how he's able to just daftly move the ball enough to trick the keeper and put it in and get Montreal off and rolling. And that's something you can't really teach. That's a goal-scoring instinct, and that's really important, particularly in the MLS Cup playoffs, which Montreal is now going to be in, as we know, where it is goals are hard to come by in the playoffs. You remember even high-scoring teams will sometimes get caught up because they're used to just rolling over, where the referees, well, God bless them, allow They'll call it like an NHL playoff game, like
Yeah, they don't call anything. Yeah, they forget their
Yeah.
whistle at home, or they just forget the little ball in the whistle, and so they don't make any noise. But you're right talking about Kai Kamara, and it's not necessarily coincidental too. It's a deserved performance. You're talking about a veteran goal scoring him on Tuesday evening. Also, the game before, where I remember it was a goal where he got the ball on the right end of the field and was able to keep the ball, basically go around the defender and then nutmeg the goalkeeper, and that goal was important. He's been scoring important goal, bringing a lot of positive energy, positive vibe to the team. And this team, even though Mihailovic was injured and he's not given the same amount of assists this year as last year, he's scoring more. Ramel Kyoto decided to score his best season in his career with 15 goals so far, and we're seeing a Montreal team that is gelling at the right time, performing well, but also performing well in ways that it's not necessarily just one player that is the reason. It's the combination of those players, and you can change one here and there. And we saw Montreal play well defensively. If you take away the 2 penalties, Montreal had a clean sheet, and of course you can't think that way, but it's not a bad defensive performance either last night versus Chicago.
Yeah, look, what I'll say about Montreal in general is they're not going to play themselves out of a game ever, I don't think. We can talk about the penalties in a minute. I think there are actually, particularly the Waterman, is worth talking about. But Montreal generally doesn't make mistakes that is going to open up a game and give it away. So in a playoff situation, particularly in this East, where they are going to be playing outside of Philadelphia teams that are all flawed deeply. I mean, this is a terrible, terrible conference, as I said before, outside of Philadelphia. Now, we both agree, and I think anyone listening reasonable, even the most hardcore Montreal fan out there would agree that Philadelphia is by far the favorite to win this conference, but it is a one-game knockout, and Montreal, by virtue, if they finish second, will avoid them until the final. That allows you to sort of go any break here, any bounce there, any sort of half nick there, as long as you just keep doing your thing, is going to give you a chance.
Or any upset, and let's just mention it too, Duane, with the win last night, they not only guaranteed a playoff spot, but they guaranteed a playoff game at home. So they will for sure finish in the top 4.
Yeah, and that's important from fan building the interest perspective, because 2016 to 2022 is a long time without a home playoff game. So that's important too. Particularly, I think this year is a uniquer opportunity to really grab attention. In the past, by the time the playoffs got deep, you're getting, towards the end of the NFL season, a lot of NFL fans, obviously, you're getting deeper into hockey. This is an earlier part of the season. So it's a chance for the Montreal, the team formerly known as the Impact and still occasionally called the Impact by me, to re-grab the attention of Montreal. So for sure, look, lots of chances there. Let's segue a bit into the penalties. And I had mentioned to you, I wanted to talk a bit about Waterman and the penalty he gave up there, and whether or not that will affect his ability to break into that Canadian men's national team. And one play is not going to be, but as I see that play, yes, it's soft. Absolutely. And my thoughts on VAR, and how I think it changes how the game is called. But I think you just have to be aware as a defender that you cannot do a motion like that in the box and in the era of VAR be expected to get away with it. Even if we all agree that it's kind of chintzy, it's called. And that's, I think, something that is a bit of a knock on him, because he's not that experienced, and it would be something I would worry about with him playing against world-class players in a John Herdman system that is very complicated at times. I mean, Alistair Johnson was interviewed by Joshua Cloakey of The Athletic, said that he had a 61-page document on the Belgium game just on his defensive responsibilities. So not an easy system to step into, I could say. But it was worth talking. In terms of the first penalty, I mean, it's soft again. As you said, it wasn't Uncle Ted's best game, but nonetheless, again.
By the way, if you're new to this, the referee's name is Ted Uncle, so the Uncle Ted joke comes from there.
Yeah, look, both of them, as I said, particularly the second one, I think, again, I don't like that it gets called, but it will get called, so don't push out like that. You defenders can't have arms in the box. I'm sorry, you just can't in a bar era. It sucks and it's wrong, but you can't. So you can't push out. The first one, I mean, look, I think that was the wrong call, honestly, because the shot had already been taken and the follow through hits him. But you can argue that it's a foul, I suppose. And as you said, you can't erase it. But I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about that from a defensive perspective. It wasn't mistakes that led to penalties. It was more of a circumstances and a refereeing choices that might not get made in another way. Particularly, probably wouldn't get made in a playoff game.
Well, speaking of Joel Waterman and the Canadian men's national team, the roster should be announced in the next hours, if not couple days. And it's rumored that maybe Joel Waterman will be there, but maybe he won't. But he's been in contention. He's been playing himself into the conversation. Of course, you'll have the mainstay of the Montreal defense included for sure in Kamara Miller, Alistair Johnston, both not playing at all last night for Montreal. And that is for sure an indication of how they will play for Canada. But with Fred Nancy managing those two players, it was the first time this year that Alistair Johnston did not play in a Montreal match, all competition. Well, an MLS, I mean. So for Alistair Johnston, it was a rest period traveling to Canadian men's national team's games for the foreseeable weeks. Of course, there's one game left on the 17th. And for sure, Johnston will be playing on that one, but not to overload his playing time. And that was probably behind the reasoning last night. But Joel Waterman is rumored to be maybe one of the players that will make his debut for the national team. 3 goals this year. He has one of the surprising statistics this year is the amount of completion in the pass department. He's the best in Montreal. Him and Samuel Piet, 89% completion rate in their passing for the 2022 season in MLS. That is a very high percentage. He is also 9th in the pass completed in the final third. Kamara Miller is top 4, but Joel Waterman is 9th in the entire league. Good performances this year by Joel Waterman defensively, offensively. He has 15 shot creating action, 4 goal creating action for Joel Waterman. It is the year of revelation for the young Canadian, the best product to, dare I say, ever come out of the Canadian Premier League so far, and he might be going to a World Cup, depending on John Herdman's decision.
Yeah, look, I mean, the debate, we saw the U.S. roster released today as well, and it's a very similar roster to what they went through qualifying, right? And a lot of people are frustrated about players not getting a look in the last window. So the question and the debate is always going to be whether you use this last window to really try and nail down the final 4 or 5 positions, or whether you use this window to keep your core group together, to keep them rolling moving forward. When it comes to Canada, look, I am in the camp of, I think that you should bring in some players. Joel Waterman, Raheem Edwards again. I think you should give these guys looks to make sure that you're getting the best guys forward.
Should we even say Ismaël Koné? Is he playing well enough with his few goals and a couple of assists lately to be considered in that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's getting some time and some form right now, I think should be looked at. But that said, I tend to think John Herdman is going to err on the side of loyalty when it comes to the call-ups in this camp and moving in the World Cup. I did a little poll just quickly before the listeners here, before the show started. It's about 80 votes now and counting, but it's by far the listeners want Joel Waterman to get a call-up right now. 84% of them have said in that poll, at 82 votes so far and counting. As I said, you can go on my Twitter if you want to participate in that. So it's very clear that most people want to see Joel Waterman get a chance. I want to see Joel Waterman get a chance. I don't know if he's going to. And I do think, however, if he doesn't get a look here, that he will absolutely be on that Gold Cup team next summer. That I think is clear, and I hope that John Herdman uses the Gold Cup and uses next year as an opportunity, because we are a long way away from the World Cup at that point, to play some younger players and look at some things. I know it sounds crazy to Canadian fans to not put our best roster into a Gold Cup, but I think it's probably we should follow the role of Mexico and the U.S. and have a slightly lesser team, and not lesser, but experimental team when it comes to that tournament, because I think we're clearly have identified ourselves as being good enough that we can win it without having our very best team and let some of the European guys chase their dream. or stay there, I mean. Anyway, but when it comes to Joel Waterman, outside of the situation or sort of the lack of experience that I mentioned off top, I do think it's he's earned that chance to get a look. And beyond that, we talked about this the other day, there's going to be injuries. I mean, we're already talking, Jonathan Osario's been hurt for the last couple weeks here in Toronto. He's back in training today, but he's not exactly a sure thing either. Anything can happen. If you get two injuries, God help us, if you get two injuries in the back, like suddenly Joel Waterman might need to play against Belgium.
And might need to start. Speaking of, just while we're talking about the Canadian national team, we barely alluded to on Monday the Atiba Hutchinson situation in Besiktas. It has been resolved. They've figured out other contracts, and the legend, the club and country legend, will be a part of the roster for Besiktas in the upcoming season.
Yeah, which is great. That's good. I mean, obviously that's good because he's not a guy. His age, I don't think, in Atiba is takes care of himself, so his age doesn't matter so much so long as he's playing. But any of us that are above a certain age know that if you are inactive for a while, it is harder to get active again.
Just thinking about it, my knees hurt. Like, just my knees are hurting right now.
Yeah, I mean, I play softball now rather than soccer. Although I'm thinking of trying soccer again, God help me, because of my my distinction as an elder gentleman in the world now.
You call them masters. You can compete for like a few categories above in the masters now.
Yeah, I'm in good shape for my age, but the key part of that sentence is the last few words there.
Speaking of playing soccer, Duane, I still hurt from playing against National Piatti a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
of course, I'm going to plug that for the rest of my life. That at one time I took the ball away from Nacho Piatti. Let's not talk about the 6th time he took it away from me, but the 4 times I took it away from him.
Or the fact he was probably playing at 10%.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Nacho Piatti at 10%, Duane, I have to say, this is really good. It's still really good.
Yeah, exactly. Look, last thought on the national team front. I think if you're not called up in this window, that it is probably likely that you're not going to get a look. I mean, they are going to play one more friendly.
Yeah, unless you leave no choice and you become like Pele and you score 3 goals a game until the World Cup, then you're like, okay, fine. But yeah. I was just going to say, I don't know if people are fully aware that they announced the Japan friendly on November 17th. Anyway, they're playing Japan on November 17th. But other than that, it's really these 2 games. So when else are you going to look at these guys, John? if you're not going to do it now, exactly.
We know the guys that got us there are going to still be there and still do well. And maybe you play the Uruguay. The Uruguay game is very much a glamour game for Canada. It really is, historically speaking. Some of the players that will be in that roster for Uruguay are well known around the world, well known in this country. I think that's maybe something you reward your veterans that got you to the World Cup with, and then you use that Qatar game to kind of look at your bottom half of the roster. That's my take on that. On this come up. We'll talk about this. Obviously,
but there's also the fact that that game is in Qatar, and it's a knowing John Herdman. This is a mental preparation. So the team that goes to Qatar, Duane, and there's a very high likelihood there's a lot of those players that actually make the team that will go to Qatar for the World Cup.
Yeah, and we're looking at 1 or 2 spots here when we're talking about the bottom half of the roster. And when it comes to Waterman, to finish this up, I would tend to err on the side of bringing a couple other defenders. First off, we have a lot of attacking power. Not across the board, so I'm less concerned about that. But if any Victoria goes down or something early, or Johnston, or you want to have some extra depth there. So I would have a look. And Daniel Henry played a role in qualifying, but he hasn't played much since.
No.
So
and what he has played, at least if John Herdman was looking at the tape of his game against Montreal, that's not necessarily arguments to choose Daniel Henry either.
Yeah, I mean, Mavinga was more the problem in the Montreal game, but no one played well there. I don't think the less you talk about that one, the better, unless you're Montreal.
Because that one cemented the hierarchy in the mind of those players. But let's take a short break. When we continue, we will look at the hierarchy in the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. We will also look at the results across Major League Soccer last night, and we'll look at the games going on tonight, the Whitecaps against the Galaxy. And a conversation you and I have been having for months is now getting traction. More details after this short break.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
I want to thank all our patrons at patreon.com/2solitudes for supporting this show and the sister show, the Two Solitudes podcast. We'll be back soon talking about the national team as we're going into a international window outside of the Montreal game last night. Montreal 3, Chicago 2. We've talked about that one. Miami 2, Columbus 1. A game, of course, delayed by Florida weather because why not? That's what happens in late August now and in September, apparently, in Florida too. But Miami and Gonzalo Higuain scored twice. Columbus only one. That means Miami gets 3 points and becomes a little closer to not only a playoff spot, but maybe a playoff game that no one would want to play, and that could be Montreal. But Miami is now 2 points behind Columbus, who is 7th in the Eastern Conference. Other scores across Major League Soccer last night: Duane, Minnesota 1, LAFC 1. Another game without a win, but the top of the West confirmed for LAFC. The Houston Dynamo 3, New England 1. The Dynamo basically putting the last nail in the coffin of the Revolution, and Kansas City putting DC United in their place, cementing DC's spot as the worst team in the league.
Yeah, well, for sure there. Look, I mean, LAFC to me is the other story for the midweek. They clinched the West with the draw, but it's not the right time to be slumping. I mean, we were talking about, well, not we necessarily, you and I, but the global we of the MLS, intelligentsia was talking about LAFC shattering the all-time points record, 4 weeks ago, and now they're not even likely going to win the Supporters' Shield from here. So that's been a remarkable turn of events there in terms of a team. Once they add, the big high-end names, they have not played as well, which tells you a lot about how MLS sometimes works.
Well, to me, they disturbed the still water, right? They made it something that was going well, and that wasn't necessarily complicated, and that was not driven by ego or, obligation of play. You had Arango there, and you had a couple of great players. You had Brian Rodriguez that you had to get rid of to make place for the other people. And to me, it's that combination you had to play with to make everybody play, and that could be the difference. If we're looking at their last 6 games, they have 1 win, they have 4 losses, and they have 1 draw. So they lost against San Jose on the road. They lost against Austin on the road. They lost against the Dynamo on the road. They lost against Dallas on the road. There's a trend here. And yes, they've won the top of the West, and they might make it all the way to the MLS Cup without playing on the road, and that could be an edge going to them. But we're not seeing a team perform well, and oftentimes there's red card involved, and we can see something interesting in LAFC being the best team in the league and not necessarily being the overall favorite to win it all.
No, precisely. And look, you look at the West now, Austin's not playing very well either over the last little while. So those two have been so far and above all year that we've kind of just assumed that it would between the two to win this thing. You look at Dallas, Nashville, Minnesota, those 3 teams right below. Particularly Nashville, I think, because Nashville plays a style that I think is set up to win in the playoffs. And if they get some home dates there, they will get a home date at 4th if they can hold on to it. Nashville, Minnesota would be kind of a coin flip, but I would give Nashville the odd if they were hosting that game. Whoever's hosting it would be the favorite. There's teams there that can knock these off, particularly in that 1-4 matchup if we get to a second round. LA, look, the other question I have, and I'm going to say this quietly because I don't want to fall into a cliche here about Gareth Bale only caring about world golf, but Gareth Bale cares a lot about going to a World Cup.
Yeah.
Is he going to be pushing through those kicks to the groin and the kicks to the legs and all that?
He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to cement his spot in the Wales lineup, right? So even if he doesn't play a minute until the end of the season, the coach of the Wales national team which finally they moved on from Ryan Giggs, which was about time to officially do so, knowing his pending trial. But to me, it's something for pondering, where motivation of players to make a national team, it's great. But once they don't, or once they feel they don't, do they have a lack of performance? Just look at George Mihailovic, only 1 goal in his last 12 games in Major League Soccer. Since his injury, it hasn't been easy. And when you're looking at other players like Gareth Bale, who doesn't need to prove himself to make his national team, is his playing time really the be-all, end-all? And was shaken of the whole thing mid-season to bring superstars for next year really what was needed? Steve Cherundolo was handling this locker room and this team greatly. And yes, it's not like they're losing every single game, but they lost a lot lately. We've just talked about it. They lost 4 of the last 6 games. And to me, that is maybe an indication that if you trouble the still water too much, or if you put too many rocks in the water, eventually the surface ain't smooth anymore and things are getting bumpy.
Yeah, look, I mean, they have time to turn it around, but there's certainly some troubling signs here. Again, it's not so much like, obviously, look at the record, 61 points right now. They have 3 games left. They'll probably finish, 65, 66, you would think, which would be a very good season in any other standards. But look, when you're reeling down the stretch, it's just not the right time to do it. And as you say, the chemistry might, sometimes you should have left well enough alone. But I guess how can you that's it. I'm not going to criticize them too much for bringing in global superstars, because that's
they need to sell jerseys. And if we're looking at the top 25 jerseys sold, well, Gareth Bale is in there. So that does maybe answer that question. Let's look at tonight's games in Major League Soccer. Orlando, Atlanta, Austin, Salt Lake. We have Vancouver and the LA Galaxy at 10 p.m. and Colorado, San Jose. And I teased before the break, a conversation that you and I had a few times this year is now getting traction across Major League Soccer, and especially in Vancouver. And the question is Vanni Sartini the one? Is Vanni Sartini the answer for your long-term coach? Is Vanni Sartini going to be back? We're getting a feeling that Lucas Cavallini won't. Really big feeling about that. It's not just a feeling at this point. But Duane, Vanni Sartini, the question is now being asked across Major League Soccer. Was he the right choice?
Well, okay. I mean, look, he's a character, and he's beloved by, the official media because he is a character. Was he the right choice, or was he the easy choice for them? And I think that we all said it at the time, and we've been pretty clear that he was the easy, cheaper choice for them at the time. They'd already paid out a guy. Are they going to pay for a big name search? And they certainly didn't. It speaks to the overall issue that Vancouver's always had over the years, is they don't seem willing to invest in that team in any real way. Now, look, I know the Vancouver fans are going to yell at their device that want to defend them, that they've spent the X transfer fee. No, that's all MLS money. It's not their owner's money, right? Like, hiring a coach, going up above and beyond for the DPs, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about MLS spend. The fact that you've had a whole bunch of transfers in using MLS allocation does not really mean that you're spending money. It's I know if you're listening to this and you're new to MLS, that's going to do your head in, but it's not as simple as just looking at numbers to understand who spends. And they're not a spending team. They're one of the cheaper teams in the league, and they took a guy that got in a hot run, took advantage of a hot striker, and made a playoff game. They played well down the stretch. Vancouver is, I think that their players deserve a lot of credit for playing under him a little bit, but they have a talent deficit there. Is he the right guy? I mean, I don't think anyone else does more with the roster, so he's not the wrong guy. The wrong guy is the person picking those players, or not spending money, or choosing not to spend money. That's the problem in Vancouver, not any coach, not any one thing. It reminds me a lot of TFC back in the day, that, this guy and it'll be good. No.
Is that Axel Schuster the wrong guy then?
Well, it's the culture is the wrong thing. Not any one piece of it. It's collectively. And Schuster might be a great GM. Vanny might be a great coach, but they're not an assistant that's going to allow them to excel. That's where I come down on that. Look, but that said, I think that what Vancouver's season, and I'm not trying to pat my own back here or pat our own back, what it's displaying is how silly it was to think that 2 months of good play, of good results, I should say, was an indicator that Vancouver was trending in the right direction. Any look at anything deeper than the points would have said, don't be blinded by last season. And sure enough, it's played out exactly the way we predicted it back in the spring. And that's not, again, we're not saying that to say, look at us, we're great. It's like more like, don't be fooled again. Like people do this all the time in all sports. Oh, a hot streak, they're just set to go. No, you got to look deeper than that if you truly want this team to excel. And I don't think that they really do in Vancouver. They're happy to tread water there. And last.
Exactly, alas. But we'll see tonight if they can get a victory, because it's now or never, but the never could be already too late. Let's look at the Western Conference and where the standings are. Duane, Vancouver is now 12th with 34 points. They are 9 points away from a playoff spot with 4 games to go. A miracle is even maybe not enough. Kansas City is 11th, Colorado 10th, Seattle 9th, but LA needs a victory. They are 8th, and that's why LA is my choice tonight against Vancouver. Salt Lake is 7th. And we're looking at Portland 6th. That's your playoff race in the Western Conference for not only positioning, but also between LA or Seattle. Can one of those two teams sneak in? But Salt Lake has a 3-point buffer in 7th position.
Yeah. If you want to be defeatist about this, the Whitecaps can officially be eliminated from the playoffs tonight with the Salt Lake win, and a Vancouver loss would eliminate the Whitecaps from the playoffs. So there you go.
And there's a good chance that would probably happen tonight. On that note, we'll be back very soon with a brand new episode. Until then, you can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute, myself at Kev Larme, and this show at Soccer Today SPN. Thanks for subscribing to our YouTube page. Thank you for subscribing and downloading the podcast, and for subscribing to our different social media channels. And as always, until next time, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.